Some important vocabulary to know when solving equations is independent and dependent variables. An independent variable is the variable that is subject to choice or one that is not influenced by another variable. The value of the dependent variable is the opposite. The dependent variable relies or depends on the value of the independent variable. So you can often use that sentence to help you figure out which variable is which. The dependent relies on the independent. Let's take a look at these types of variables in an example. We have the example that Frank earns $8 per hour mowing his neighbor's lawns. The amount of money he earns, M, depends on how many hours he works, H. So the more hours he works, the more money he earns. Therefore, the dependent variable is money, M, and the independent variable is hours, H. And the amount of hours he works does not rely on the money he earns. That wouldn't make sense, so we have to keep it this way. Again, the dependent variable is money, and that's relying on the independent variable of hours. So now let's try this. Let's try to guess the missing variable in the table. We have two given independent variables and one dependent, so then we want to find the opposite. In the first row, we have an independent variable of how much gas you have. So think about what relies on how much gas you have. What could you fill in as the dependent variable? Same thing for the second row. You have an independent variable of the temperature of pool water. Ask yourself, what could possibly rely or depend on the temperature of pool water? And then doing the opposite, now we're giving a dependent variable of your test score. So think about what your test score relies on. What would be the factor, what would be the cause of a higher test score or a lower test score? So that would be your independent variable. What could you fill in these missing spots? So for the independent variable of how much gas you have, the dependent variable would be how far you can drive. Think about it. How far you can drive depends or relies on how much gas you have in your car. If you have a little bit of amount of gas, you can go a short distance or you can drive a short distance. But if you have a lot of gas in your car, you can drive a farther distance. Then the same idea for the temperature of pool water is the independent variable. The dependent variable would be the amount of swimmers in the pool. Think about the amount of swimmers relies on the temperature of the pool water. If the temperature of the pool water is really cold, there's going to be a small amount of swimmers in the pool. And if the temperature of the pool water is warmer or hotter, or a higher temperature, there would be a lot more swimmers. So the amount of swimmers relies on the temperature of the pool water. And then for the dependent variable of your test score, well, what does that rely on? That relies on your study time. If you study for a higher amount of time, you're going to get a better test score. And if you study for a lower amount of time, it's more likely you'll get a lower test score. So your test score relies on the study time. So using these examples, you have your independent and dependent variable. Think of what's similar between all of the independent variables. Think of what's similar between all the dependent variables and then how they relate to each other. So try now by yourself or with a group to think of at least three more examples of independent and dependent variables. You can use almost a template of that. The dependent will rely on the independent variable, and that can help you sort out which one is which. And there's so many different examples, right? We have 3 in the above table, but you can think of definitely at least three more. But again, test them out with that sentence. The dependent variable relies on the independent variable, and make sure that makes sense. I will say, though, a common independent variable, just like temperature above, is time. Time is you can't control time. Time is just going to happen. So a lot of time the independent variable will be time. There's not a lot of common dependent variables. Sometimes money is a good variable to work with, but it really depends on the situation. But just remember, ask yourself one more time, I'll say, the dependent variable relies on the independent variable, and you should be okay figuring out which variable is which.